From the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
My name is Emily Crosby, and I'm here this morning on December 1st, 2015, with Mrs. Jeanette Smith and Mrs. Raylawni Branch, and we're at the University of Southern Mississippi Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage, which has been helping with these interviews. And this interview is part of the Civil Rights History Project, co-sponsored by the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So good morning and welcome, and thank you
Good
for
morning.
being with us.
Thank you.
I wonder if we could start, if you could each just say a little bit about when you were born, where you were born, and your family. I guess you're starting, Ms. Smith.
I was born in Jones County, Free State of Jones.
Wow.
I was born January 1st, 1940. And basically, I have property up there now, have the family property. So my heritage is deep there. And eventually, I would like to move back to Soso. Yeah. It has so many fun memories. I had wonderful parents. They really raised us right. And under the circumstances, being a product of the Free State of Jones, our parents didn't teach us to hate anyone. And that was a good thing for me, especially going through the movement.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in Jackson for a while, for 2 years. Then I moved back to Soso, finished high school, and met my husband. I married him and moved here to Hattiesburg in 1959, January.
You know, not everybody's going to know about the Free State of Jones. Can you
Okay.
tell us about that?
Captain Newton Knight was able to meet my great-great-grandmother, Rachel. His grandfather had bought her as a slave. He fell in love with her, and he figured that, you know, he would just establish his own state. He didn't believe in segregation. He married her, and he had a family by her. And my grandfather was a product of that family. So he wasn't successful in establishing his Free State of Jones, so he deserted the Confederacy and joined the Union. And
He seceded from the Confederacy.
right, he succeeded. And there is a movie coming out
Oh, yeah.
about it. It's just Dr. Bynum was doing like you. She wrote a book on the Free State of Jones. And what that book does, it documents my people.
So in Mississippi, where we think of things as sort of black and white, right?
It was never black and white.
Yeah, never.
And I think this area is one of the places that really shows some of the complexity of that.
Right, it did. And then that's one reason, because the mixture of the races, that's why black people have so much land, because they gave all each other land.
So, and that's the land that's still in
It's
your
the
family.
land that I have.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes from my mother's side,
Okay.
which is the same, my father's side, rather, which is the same type of situation. My grandfather was Indian and white, and, you know, it's just a mixture like that on both sides, biracial people.
What kind of work did your family do, your parents?
My mother was a black nurse, and my father was a contractor, a carpenter, and he did farming. He had his own land. He was hired out. He built a lot of some of the elegant homes there for the doctors and lawyers and people like that.
Yeah.
He was independent.
And I want to come back and follow up, but Ms. Branch, could you tell us about when and where you were born in your family?
I was born the 1st of September, 1941. We're of the same age group. I was born here in Hattiesburg, 711 Whitney Street, in my grandmother's house. It was a 3-room a shotgun house with outdoor privy. We had sidewalks, so at that time you paid for them if you wanted to get sidewalks in
I
front of
pay
you.
for it.
And
Did you pay the city or did you pay somebody?
you pay
to
the
put 'em
city.
in?
You
Okay.
pay the city, and they install them. So the street on which I was born had a church on the corner. Miss Emma Campbell, who, I don't know where Miss Emma came from, but Miss Emma was even lighter in skin color than Jeanette. And Mr. Kelly, I think, was some way tied up in that. There are several little communities around Hattiesburg where there were situations like Jeanette's parents, and they had children. I was born here in Hattiesburg. I had one brother born here in Hattiesburg, even though there are 10 of us, 10 children. And I too come from family out around Prentice, Mississippi, a little village called Mount Carmel, Mississippi. And we went back and looked at the books, and my great-grandparents actually bought that property, 40 acres. Each one, they bought 80 acres. Nobody gave that 40 acres and a mule. That never was a true thing. It might have been on the books, but it wasn't something that actually happened. But land was divided up in 40 acres. I lived between Hattiesburg and Mount Carmel, went to school between Hattiesburg and Mount Carmel. And I'm a person who, I would say, I would beg to differ with you about the civil rights history. We are making history today because civil rights is still a problem worldwide.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't believe in different races of mankind. We're all men. We're all mankind. We're not all men, but we're all mankind. I would love to have it before I die, where people are like Jeanette and I. We were never taught to hate people, because when you went to a funeral, there were blonde and blue-eyed people there who were your closest of kin. So you grew up with this in your head, and I really never knew a difference until the death of Emmett Till. And that, I was in Chicago at that time. I was a teenager. And up until then, just did not realize the hatred and hate. I knew there were differing communities, but the lady who lived next to my great-grandmother, who was married to a gentleman who did not have much sense, I would say. He drank, and he didn't take care of his family properly. He didn't farm properly. And she was what we call today white, Caucasian, of European extraction. Po white folks, some folks call them. Po crackers, some people call them. But she would come over and help my great-grandmother get food in, and canned, and peas shelled. So my great-grandmother would give food and meat to her to take to feed the host of young'uns, as they say, that she had. Her husband was no good, but she would come and help my great-grandmother. So I grew up not really understanding, because there were situations like that.
Was that kind of interaction and community, was that the same in town as it was out in the country?
I think in town, women of color worked in the big houses, in the houses. And it was many times, it was a reciprocal relationships. You were able to carry home the food that was left over, the clothes that were too little left over. When you wanted to buy a house, Miss Ann could call the bank, or her husband could call the bank and say, you know, give so and so that loan for that house.
Mm-hmm.
So there were relationships, but the badness was there. It was there. I think the movie The Help tells the story better than anything I've ever seen, as far as the meanness.
Mm-hmm. What kind of work did your parents do?
My father was a farmer. He died when I was 14, and he died in Chicago. He thought he couldn't get a job. There were no jobs. You can be hired out by someone. I can remember picking cotton, sitting on what they call a slide, pulled by a mule from one field to another. And my mother was a housewife up until we went to Chicago. In Chicago, my father worked at, the first job he had was Tip Top Bakery, and I'm sure it was just scut work, you know. My mother's first job, I remember, was at Brock Candy Company. And my mother was so fair, they hired her thinking she was white. And she didn't have better sense than to go sit and have lunch with the person, the one woman in the building who was colored. She would go and sit and have lunch, and finally the supervisor said to her one day, "Why do you go sit with her and have lunch?" And that N-word. And my mother said, "Because I'm one of those." And she was fired on the spot. And I would have kept the job to help feed my children, because we lived much better in Mississippi than we ever did in Chicago.
Was that because you could raise your food, or what was the?
You had land, you could raise your food, you had relatives, you had family, and everybody in town was kin one way or the other.
I was going to ask what it was like for you to move to Chicago from Mississippi.
It wasn't that much different as a child. There were very few children of European extraction in my classes, very few. There were none here, except all of those little high yellow ones like Miss Smith, or even the blonde, green-eyed cousins. But it wasn't much different. When we went to Oak Park outside of Chicago, or Winnetka, Illinois, on the train, the school would take you on the school trip. You'd go on the L train and just ride so far and get off and come back. And you would see all these big, beautiful homes and communities, and but you didn't internalize it as something against you. You just figured that your parents couldn't afford it. But we did own our home in Chicago. My daddy bought a home. In fact, he bought two, and he got sick. He had some type of blood dyscrasia, and my mother was pregnant, and we lost our home, and we ended up in the park, homeless, furniture in the alley.
What did your family do?
We lived in the park for a while. We were just homeless folks, trying to find some place to sleep at night, and that was usually one room, and everybody piled into that one room. I would never take my children back to a city. Now, this is a city, but I'm now able to own and buy and sell, and but I would not. I see people in, let's say, out of Africa and out of the Middle East trying to get to Europe. Some are getting there and finding out the streets are not paved with gold. And it's better at home. Even if you had to mash the corn by hand, it's better at home.
I want to come back to what you said about Emmett Till, but first I was wondering if you could both tell me some of the things that you learned in school and from your families that you think are important.
Well, I grew up in a family, Seventh-day Adventists. We had our own school. We were called the White Negro. So, you know, even though our relatives were dark, but you had to fight racism within both races. And you had the terrorists, the Ku Klux Klan. It's just that we were descendants of Newt Knight, so didn't nobody bother Newt because he was known. He didn't take no stuff, he didn't bother his people. But when my mother married my daddy, they called them Musgroves, them crazy Musgroves. He said, my children are going to public school. We're not going to isolate them. They got to live in the real world. They got to live with their relatives. Some of them are dark and some of them are light. We didn't have anything to do with this. So what we're going to do, we're going to live within what's going on. You're going to accept what's going on. You're not going to have any hatred against people that's darker than you and white people. You're going to live in the real world. You're going to love everybody. My people were Christian people. They didn't believe in, hatred and stuff like that. And if you open-minded, and our people had traveled, and I had never traveled that much, but I did. But I had relatives who had been everywhere and were very important people. And you have struggles of terrorists been going on from the beginning of time. That's why
We're used to terrorism.
I'm just so appalled that they're making such an issue on these immigrants. It just, to me as a little girl, I always wonder, how can they come in here and take this country from the Indians, slaughter them, and kill them, and it's their country. Then I found out in California they did the same thing. It's just people that conquered. And then my mother would teach me to read the Bible. It was going on back then. Same thing, brother against brother. That's sin in the world. That has nothing to do. They don't even know why they're doing it. So then as a little girl, I have so many questions. Why would this man, knowing it was illegal, marry this, well, she was a mixed woman, marry her and try to establish his own country and bring about children that are going to be faced with all this hatred among both races? You're not accepted anywhere. So I remember growing up, the streaks you see now, I had them all the time, but I tinted them. I tinted my hair just as soon as I could. And I learned because my mother, my first cousin had a beauty college right by Jackson State. So I learned how to cover it up. I thought of myself, I said, a little polecat. I'm just strict. I'm just messed up. And then my mother would get on my case. Why are you asking all these questions? I said, well, Mama, I just want to know. She said, we don't talk about that. We're trying to outlive that. I don't want you to go back in the past. You didn't have anything to do with being born. You're God's child. So I kept pounding on that. I'm God's child. I don't really have any feelings toward anyone. I get along with everyone. Those are just problems of the world. You got terrorists all over the world fighting over a little piece of land over there in Israel. That's not enough for anyone. Same thing all over the world. So I know that, which my mother taught me, and as I get older, I know this. I'm Jesus Christ's child. or whatever religion you believe in. My salvation is not of this world. It's somewhere else.
You know, those questions you're asking and your sense of not belonging in either community, do you remember sort of when and how you first had a sense of not belonging in either community, or how that happened to you, how you understood that?
Well, first of all, they question my eyes. You know, you can tell a person is biracial. Mostly got the green eyes. You know, they got those eyes, and they call me I was a devil's child. You know, I just been
Is that in school?
well, so. I lived exactly a mile from the school. I couldn't catch the bus because I didn't want to fight my relatives. I'd walk to school every morning. It was something about your hair. They pull your hair. They did it. You're different, you know. And then I just want to be like everybody else.
We're still being called different in Hattiesburg.
So what I'm saying, you were right about that. So what I'm saying is, can I be just American? I want to be an American citizen. I don't want to be black or white. I just am an American. You know, and then you think about it within yourself, and then you got to be very careful. You don't want to offend anybody. You can't be too outspoken because you'll offend someone. And I really don't want to do that. But it's very difficult when you are mixed. Very. You catch it all, even when you're born. You know you're different.
They called my mother Butter Gal because she was blonde. And at the time, her stepfather was her stepfather. My grandmother was raped by the plantation owner. And when she found out she was pregnant, she ran off it's a little area out near Prentice called Friendship. And she ran off to Hattiesburg. She worked enough to buy a house. They were selling houses from World War I off of Camp Shelby, little shotgun houses they had down there. And they moved them from Camp Shelby up to Hattiesburg. So there would be just lines of these rows of shotgun houses. They'd stick them beside the railroad track anywhere. My grandmother married what they call a Cajun out of southern Louisiana.
What at that time, what made someone a Cajun?
They were Frenchmen originally out of Newfoundland, and they boated them down, shipped them down from Newfoundland to the Louisiana Territory. And the Native Americans, and I don't know which nation, the Native Americans and Africans. And they are still calling themselves Cajuns. They speak with a little accent. They live in those swamps. I'm not saying they're backwards or anything. It's just that they maintain that culture. Mm-hmm. And my mother's father, whom she called father, she fit him. So my grandmother made a decision never to have another child after he was killed on the railroad. He worked on the railroad in 1932. And that was a year when I did a little research, when there were many men of color who were killed on the railroad. Now, whether it was just purely accident or intentional, I don't know. But my mother was an only child. And my grandmother would put a bowl on top of her head and just cut her hair around like that and around the front. And she would deliver the butter that my grandmother would make, because my granddad had a cow and a pig that he'd keep down on the river, which was just a quarter mile away. So for my mother, she would not talk about the fact of who she was and how she came about. It was a taboo subject. And I went looking for a birth certificate for her. And the sad thing, I can't smile on this one. The sad thing is that she lived until she was 67 and she never knew her real name. On the birth certificate, it says Christine Holloway. They mixed my grandmother's name, which was Fannie Mae Holloway. They took the O, mistook the O, and made it an A, or just didn't care or whatever. So she was born and died and never knew her name. But her name that we knew was Alphonsia Elsie, after her daddy out of Louisiana. And when we looked up Frank Elsie, she was the only child listed under him, even though he had been married before. And I don't know if there was a divorce or anything like that. It was very hard for my mother. She was like your family. She was ostracized on both sides. If you had one drop, 1/32nd,
116.
1/16, what they call black blood, you were black. So you could be blonde and you can be blue-eyed. But if there was as Mr. Carter would say, one in the woodpile, then you were that. For me, I was dark enough. No, the only people who mistakes me are some people from Thailand or some of the Hawaiian Islands, Fijians, Koreans. There's some dark-skinned Koreans, and I get mistaken, especially by the men, if I'm walking on the street. And I went to school part-time in New York City, and I found that those kinds of people would talk to me in their language, and I would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. It was probably good I didn't understand. But I know that many people, and I straightened my hair at that time. I don't straighten my hair anymore. I just got to where I said, I have to love me no matter what. And I love me all over. I still own the property that my grandmother inherited. And so my daddy's dead, and it came to us children. And we've maintained it. In fact, I have a daughter who's retiring next year, and I gave 12 acres to her, and she's going to build a house on her 12 acres. And she's going back to the country like you.
I love it.
Does anybody farm your land, or is it timber?
No, it's timber. It's timber. But it's beautiful land, and I'm sure if you put my great-grandmother used to have her garden closest to the house, and then there were fields of corn and cotton and all kinds of vegetables, a smokehouse. And once a year, people would get together, once or twice a year. The women would get together and do all the canning, and the men would get together in the fall and make syrup and smoke meat, and the women would make sausage. And so it was more community than what you have in a city.
How often would you and your family get together? Be honest in the comments.
You didn't have that. Well, yes, you did. You had those. My uncle and aunt who had a store, but his daddy, his daddy was Colonel Hall, Colonel Robert Hall, and my uncle Rowan were first cousins. So him being green-eyed and very fair and blonde, he not only had the store in our little village, he was even allowed to sell guns and ammunition,
Went up there.
which was a law. Blacks could not own hardwares, so they could because they could get guns and ammunition. But he was allowed because he was who he was.
That's interesting.
And that family, Aunt Ella Mae married one of my uncles on my daddy's side, and Aunt Ella Mae was blonde and blue-eyed when she died, and she was in her late 60s. So we're just humans, and you can't afford to hate anyone because then you hate yourself. And I usually don't use, black and white. Everyone here at the university knows I don't. And I think some people do things out of guilt. Because I know
say one thing and then
that plaza. Have you seen the plaza? There's a plaza on campus. It has Armstrong Branch Plaza. It's
You knew it.
2 blocks long. It's wide. It's seats on both sides. The International Building is on it because I had made a comment that I would love to have the International Building on the plaza. It was put on the plaza. So I don't think they could do anything else for us. For 93 they started the Armstrong Branch lecture series. So you've gotten watches and all kinds of pictures and things and dinners but I would rather them use the money for scholarships and not things. Of course, you can't blow down a building, and we've had some buildings blown down on this campus. I mean, I don't think a tornado had ever been through here before it was built. The school was built over 100 years ago, but the tornado came through and really...
Recently?
Yes.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, it was recent. It was 2013, February 10th, 2013.
I remember. I was in New York, but I remember
Yeah.
because it's we have
Now, this is home for you?
Claiborne County.
Okay, so you're a Mississippian. That's right. You did tell
I
that
was
to me.
raised here. Came when I was 8.
Okay.
We haven't talked yet about the fact that you were one of the first students to integrate the University of Southern Mississippi. So I wanted to give that context for what you were talking about with the Branch Plaza and the lecture series. And
Well,
we can.
without people like her husband and her and the things they did during the late 50s, early 60s, people like Mr. Vernon Damer, the Bournes, there are just so many people who helped me, helped us. Elaine Armstrong. Gwendolyn Elaine Armstrong is her name. Gwendolyn is 6 years younger than me. She graduated from the same high school I did, Rowan, which was the colored high school. She wanted to go to school at home. She wanted to stay at home because her mother was handicapped, and she felt it was best for her to stay at home and not go off to Alcorn or Jackson State. And since Ole Miss had integrated, quote unquote, integration never really came about. They had to be the first school, the politics behind it. They had to be the first one, and poor James Meredith really caught hell doing that. And people died, and people were injured, and the devil showed his face on that campus. By the time we came here in '65, we didn't have any problems at all. I think I got called a nigger one time, and the ball field at that time was where the business school is, out on the highway there, off the service road. That's where we went and had gym. I'll never forget the first time I went into the gym building to change clothes. I was putting on my shorts, and there was a big mirror. When I came up, I could see these girls standing behind me in the mirror. They're watching for my tail. Because some people actually thought we had tails. And I guess they had been reared up with that lie. And I just smiled. You don't pick a fight over something so silly. They could see I had no tail. Maybe they thought I cut it off. I don't know. But they alphabetized us in class. So I was always one of the last ones. If you look in the yearbook, you'll see I'm one on almost the last page there. There were a few people maybe who had come out of Europe or had Z's or V's or, you know, I was a Y. And so there might have been some Z's after me. But in the classroom, I was usually the last student. Most instructors just ignored us. We were just there. Elaine and I never really had a class together. She was an A, Armstrong. So she was usually up front in the class, and I was in the back. And if you look at the yearbook, you can see they made us all the same color. I mean, you can't find us by color. No, not at all. The gentleman who was our advisor was Dr. Godfrey Fish. He was in the science department. And Dr. Fish, in a meeting with Dr. McCain, who was the president, and he had been told if he allowed anyone to come here, they would shut down the school. The governor, who was Ross Barnett at that time, said they would close down the school.
I should say that we're actually in the McCain Library
Yes,
here.
we are actually.
And this is President McCain.
This is President McCain. He lived in what we call the Ogletree house. The Ogletrees gave a lot of money. I mean, that's the only way you get something, of course, with your name on it out here. But except my case, the Department of Transportation, King, who was Senator King at the time, signed off on over $1 million to put in this plaza. I think they did it out of guilt, but it doesn't matter. It establishes the fact that we were here, and there are bronze plaques in the ground on both ends. But Dr. McCain had stated that he could not let anyone come, and that's why he didn't let Clyde Kennard come. And what happened to Clyde was criminal. And everyone involved should have gone to jail. But at that time, you can just walk up to someone and shoot them. You weren't going to jail. You weren't even going to, I mean, if they had a trial, it was a mockery.
I know you said you don't like to use black and white, but what you're talking about here, right, is if a white person killed a black person.
Yes. There's a video of the guy, and they showed it right in that video. It was one of those Eyes on the Prize, where this guy walks up in Macomb, Mississippi, white, and just shot point blank a black guy who was going in to register to vote.
That was, I think, State Representative E.W. Hurst.
And
Herbert Lee.
yes, and they I don't think anything. I don't even think they had a trial.
They had a coroner's jury that day.
Yeah, but no real criminal indictment and taken to court. But he was told that USM, it wasn't USM, it was Mississippi Southern College, and then went to university. And what Clyde was a person who believed in the goodness of mankind.
Make sure each one get their own
Do you,
shot.
do you know
He
his
said, "You
story
looking for them
from when it was
to
happening?
share
Or do you
Oh
know it
yes,
from
I
later?
know
So
his
did you
story.
know him?
I knew him personally. I worked where he brought eggs.
Then
Not every day. He would bring in flats of eggs, crates of eggs. I worked in a little restaurant on Mobile Street. And the day he came in, there were several gentlemen. They would meet at Smith Truck Store, the leaders. And they tried to talk him out of coming out here. Each time, that last time he came alone.
Is that the black leadership?
Yes. They tried to talk him out of. Now, there were conversations behind the scenes with Dr. McCain, Mr. Berger, who was the black principal, if I have to identify people, black or white, who was the black principal over at Rowan. He and Mr. Roy, who was a principal at Eureka, wasn't he? They wanted a black junior college put here in Hattiesburg. So, in a way, they were sellouts to me. And of course, I graduated with one of Mr. Berger's sons. And I know they loved their dad, they loved their mom. But to me, they were sellouts. We needed access. This was a state-run school with state taxes. We needed to be able to go here just like everyone else.
And so they tried to talk Mr. Kennard out of
From coming
so that they
out
could
here
get the
alone.
junior college.
Oh yes, they talked to Clyde several times. I think it's documented in the Sovereignty Commission. It's certainly documented in some of the other papers. So Dr. McCain played the politics, allowed Ole Miss to be the first one with James Meredith. And since we were girls, Dr. Lucas calls us angels, but Dr. McCain had a few other choice words, I'm sure, because he belonged to the John Birch Society. And that's just the same as the Klan. So when we came to campus, I give all credit to Clyde. I mean, that was in the late 50s. We came mid-60s.
Make it as if you're a baby or however you want to do it.
And the good people who would supply food to me and helped us and paid tuition and stuff like that. Elaine and I both come from poverty. And there were many days we'd walk back and forth from the other side of town to here.
I want to follow up on some of what you said, but Ms. Smith, you nodded your head too. Did you know Mr. Kennard?
I sure did. I knew him in a different way. I knew of him when he was arrested and he was in the jail and he was sick. At that time they had Dr. Willis Walker, a white doctor, and the Bowen brothers, who were very instrumental in NAACP and sending her and the other young lady to Southern, and the two young ladies,
William
Carey, and my son that integrated public schools. I knew him because Mr. Boyenston wanted him to see one of our physicians, which was my husband. He checked him and examined him and explained to them that he needed a workup, you know.
This is when he's at Parchman?
This was when he was in the Forest County Jail.
In Forest County.
That's when I first met him, Forest County Jail. They later, I think, they still sent him on Parchman. They later, when they did check him out, it was too late. He had cancer.
It was at 24.
So you think he already had it?
Now
He had it. He had it then. He had the symptoms, but he knew that he had to work him up. They could have sent him to the medical center up there to Jackson, but
they gave him hard labor.
They did. They just did him so wrong. But We tried to keep up with him, but you know what? That was his mission. That was his mission. God had to free his people. And the way I see it, those things that happened to me, putting me where the movement was happening. When I first met Raylawni, I met Raylawni at a NAACP meeting in 1959. So she was the little secretary. So we had to go up those stairs down on Mobile Street. And a lot of people say, oh, she didn't live here, she wasn't here. But that's not true. I've always known her being a fighter, that'll stand up by herself. She don't need a crowd. You know, so God has put some of us on this earth as a mission. We have to thank Clyde Kennard for his mission.
Not everybody's going to know about Mr. Kennard, so can you explain the backstory, like what happened with him?
There's some I can tell you and some I can't.
I can tell you something.
He lived outside on the north side of Hattiesburg, a small community called Macedonia?
Well,
Or is that Kelly Settlement?
Kelly Settlement.
Kelly Settlement.
Okay. By the airport. Out there by the
Yeah,
airport.
between here and the airport.
So you were going to tell us about Mr. Kennard.
Mr. Kennard had come to Hattiesburg to help his mother. His father died, and they had a chicken farm. They raised biddies, small baby chickens, up to a certain size, and then they went off to the feed stores, and it depended on the size when they got bought and by whom. And he had come out here a total of 3 times. But when he started, and the conversations were going on between McCain, the governor, it might have been Johnson all the way back then when they started, Governor Johnson.
Was it Governor Coleman
No, I don't think it was Coleman.
in the 50s?
It was just before Ross Barnett.
I think it might have been Governor Coleman,
Coleman.
then Ross Barnett, then Johnson.
Okay. Well, whichever one it was, there were conversations going on. And I, as I said, I knew Clyde because he brought eggs into what we call Fat's Kitchen. It was one of the restaurants right next to Smith Drugstore. Yeah, it was Smith in the beginning, Smith Drugstore. And over the years, I graduated in '59. That was the year. And I think was that the last year he came out here? Whatever the last year it was that he came out here.
In 59.
But remember when we was in Georgia?
And he came alone,
That damn plantation.
and they arrested him. First, eventually it was, at one time it was whiskey in the car, at one time it was something else, and then it was, he stole chicken feed. Now, the story about the chicken feed. A friend of his worked at one of the feed stores, and the chicken feed came in 100-pound bags. So sometimes the bags on the bottom would get damp, and they wouldn't sell that. They would throw it out. So he would sweep it up, and they would rebag it. Friend. Mr. Kennard didn't work there. Mr. Kennard worked on his farm and sold eggs and chickens, I guess, sometimes. I don't. The young man, the man at the time, he wasn't. I mean, he's my age. We were the same age. Robert.
I can't recall his last name.
I'll think of it.
We can
Anyway,
put it in.
he would get by the time he would gather together 500 pounds, 5 bags, he would take it to Clyde because all the chicken feed places, all the feed houses, refused to sell chicken feed to him. They figured that would run him out of business.
And that's because he was trying to go to Southern.
because he was trying to go to Southern. And so they were doing,
Remember,
pressuring
we
him.
don't pay it or whatever, and I put that thumb
And
down
then
or
he was
whatever, and
arrested,
he gave me the
and
top for that.
it was very devastating for me to see what's supposed to be the law do such a terrible thing.
You want to pay for it, or we can try when I pay for it.
And Mr. J.C. Fairley and I tried. We didn't try. We did. Mr. Fairley got in touch with Dick Gregory
It was
and Charles Evers, who was in Chicago. Charles Evers was Medgar's brother, Medgar Evers' brother, who was killed in Jackson, Mississippi. They met us at the airport in Jackson on a private plane. It was paid for by Dick Gregory. And we talked Mr. Robert, what's his last name? Anyway, we talked him into going and telling the truth. Because if you look at the court case, it's a comedy. Mr. Roberts, did you say that Clyde told you to steal that chicken feed? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, he did. He was 19. He was very frightened, scared to death of white folks, and just said whatever that lawyer said to say, he said. And he got 7 years. Now, there's some things I had to leave out of that. But he is still living. He goes to Shady Grove Baptist Church. And Jerry Mitchell out of Jackson with the Clarion Ledger and I got together, and he'll tell you if you email him, and brought the man to my house, and he told us that story. So there was never any stealing involved. They still say Clyde Kennard went to jail for stealing. He didn't. He went to jail because he tried to come to Southern.
Protesters rally.
You mentioned Mr. Fairley.
After abortion.
Mr. J.C. Fairley.
Yeah, and he was president of the NAACP then, is that what?
Yes, at that time.
At that time, yes. Mr. Damon was before Mr. Fairley.
Ms. Smith, did you have parts you wanted to add about Mr. Kennard? How you knew him? And
Well, I think, yes, I knew him because the NAACP was helping him.
Oh, yes.
And that's who was really the backbone of everything. Integrating the public accommodations, voting, and everything. The reason that you had this summer of '64, because Hattiesburg was like a mecca of people that you had a group of men in the 1950s had filed a suit to get the right to register to vote. In the 50s, you had a group that had always fought for their rights. And we've had a branch, NAACP branch here since 1946. So the people came because it was safe. That's why you had so many people to come down. And sometimes it's sad. And so I'll never forget this judge from Pennsylvania had said, if it's not local, it's not real. See, we were not writers. We didn't come down here representing churches, organizations. We weren't documenting in history. We were just doing it because we wanted our rights. And in fact, I have a kind of feeling about that. You know, for people come in to profit from what the people did, a lot of times they don't even get recognition for it. And it's kind of a sad thing because the local people haven't gotten the recognition. They could have lost their lives. They burned churches, homes, ran them out of town. Like they threatened us. They were terrorists. You know, they threatened many people. And they lived through that. They didn't, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they didn't go back home. And then I'm a traveler. So this friend of mine who was a journalist who stayed with me, I went to visit her in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The first thing I wanted to know what kind of community. She lived in a gated community, no integrated church, no integrated schools. But she was down here fighting our cause, and she needed to be home fighting her cause. So it just bothered me, the double standards. So it stuck with me. If it's not local, it's not real. If I see acts of segregation right now or double standards, I want to attack it. I want to get rid of it because it shouldn't be. We are in America. And I don't have any problems being black. I appreciate the black culture. They made me what I am. They made me strong, not bitter, but want to get rid of the problem. I want to be like everybody else. I told my children that. Everybody around me, I want them to be there. The black people accepted me because I'm unlike her. I have four cultures in me. Indian, I have white, black, Spanish. And I'm 1/4 for each one of those. So I was up there in gambling in the casino, and somebody told me that I could get me. They had some money up there for me. All I had to do.
At the Choctaw.
Yeah, I could get some because I'm
5%.
I'm 1/4, but I'm 1/4.
Oh,
So
gosh,
I said,
yes.
oh my goodness.
You have to go up there to apply.
That's what they told
Yeah,
me.
the chief says.
I talked to the chief before they got the lady chief.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought about that. I said, I'm not trying to profit off of that. I just want everybody to be treated equal. We have equal rights. We are the only race that came here against our wishes as slaves. I don't want to be bitter about that. Those people were trying to make money. And the folks who had them on the ship, they cleaned them up and they started integration on the ship. How could you have such double standards? How could you hate people and you have sex with them and families by them? How could you do that? How could you own them behind the scenes and when you get with someone else, you can't own them? But living through that, and when we got us, and I'm so proud of him, he called himself a black president. Because the black people,
When did you do that?
he's the black president. Obama, he's a black president. He aligned himself with the black race.
Oh, you mean, okay.
Obama.
He had no choice. If he'd have chosen,
But he did though.
Yeah, he did.
You have to admire him for that.
He's as much one as the
Let
other.
me tell you what I admire him. No matter what they do to him, he doesn't come out with bitterness.
Yeah.
He come out giving them a lesson. And some of the times what they do to him, I want to go in my self-defense mode. I want to go in there and defend it. Do something to him. Now, you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
That's the aggressive self-defense, right?
Disrespecting our president. But for once, Raylawni, we have a man in there that represents us. So in America, everybody's represented. We have a biracial president.
And it's certainly not the color issue.
It's not.
Because Dr. Carter, is it Carter?
Yeah.
I wouldn't vote for Dr. Carter if he was running for dog catcher.
But he's a good surgeon.
But he doesn't even do that anymore, so we can't call him a good surgeon anymore. He might have been a good surgeon.
Can I circle back, Ms. Branch? When you
Circle.
mentioned Charles Evers and Dick Gregory and bringing the plane to Jackson, was that when Mr. Kennard was released at the very end to go to his sisters?
No, we were trying to get the boy who was the state witness
to tell the truth.
to tell the truth. And he was so afraid. We did get him to Chicago. And they took him out to dinner. And he said they put this big steak in front of him. But there was a white woman sitting next to him. He couldn't eat the steak. He said, I couldn't swallow with this white woman sitting next to me. And he left the group with the excuse he had to go to the bathroom or something, and left the group and found his way back to Hattiesburg.
So he was just
Yeah,
ready
you
for
definitely
you.
could.
He was scared to death. And all these years,
Oh,
he's
no,
still.
baby, that was perfect.
We
Yeah,
have a Clyde Kennard Day here on campus. We have a Clyde Kennard Day in Mary Magdalene Church where he is buried. And he goes to Shady Grove,
Even though the jury
where
is definitely different.
there's some very strong people that's come out of Shady Grove. Mr. Damon was one of them. He's never talked about it. Now, is that out of fear still, or is that out of shame that he didn't stand up like a man?
Yeah,
I would have probably been dead. I think I was born, as you say, with mission. I quit school and got the principal fired when I was 4.5 in Mount Carmel, Mississippi, because he hit me 4 times along with 3 other students for going in the book house, and we didn't go in the book house. And I kept telling him, we weren't the ones that went in the book house. It was those other children that ran when you came. But he called the assembly and whipped 4 of us, little tots, pre-primer they called it, pre-primer, where you read Wee Willie Winkle. I was reading at 4.5, so they said, let her go to school. So I went to school, and he whipped me. And when I got my 4 licks, I walked down those little 3 steps off the stage and just kept walking. And he's screaming, young lady, come back here and sit down. And I turned around and I said, I'm going home and tell my daddy. And they called a meeting at the church that night, and he was fired because he was wrong. I don't care what your color. If you're wrong, you're wrong.
So I guess that must have been an early lesson for you. I mean, you stood up for yourself and then you got backed up.
I've always stood up for myself. My great-grandmother, who on my daddy's side, told the story. She had 2 boys who were Pullman porters. They fought with Philip Randolph, Philip A. Randolph, I think it is, A. Philip Randolph. She would get a pass, the family would get a pass, and she would go somewhere different, California, Washington State, every year, following the Federated Women's Club. And they would have a national convention, and she was one of those who could afford to go because she had the pass. And she said this conductor was taking her ticket and called her Amy. And she said she turned and looked at him and said, you know, I don't know you. I don't know your mother, and I don't know your father. I'm not sister to either one of them. So how am I your Amy? So I come up. There was a shotgun at the door. It wasn't the shotgun you hunted for food. And nobody was to come through that door after your family.
I don't know
Nobody.
now or whatever, but
I learned to shoot. Oh, yes. I learned to shoot. Yes.
and maybe like
You
can't live in the country
come together working and all
and not know how to shoot. My mother hunted. And yet I'm a person against guns. I've learned the NRA is a shameful part of America.
I love guns.
Well, I don't. There's one in our house, but it's an antique. I wouldn't shoot it. Probably shoot me.
I believe in self-defense. You know, some things, but you know, and I understand my mission. I understand people who've been inflicted with fear. It's ingrained in them. So in forgiving people, you gotta understand them. We were blessed to have been born with a mission. Most people don't have that. That's why I'm very forgiving. See, you didn't ask to be born white.
mean, I'm gonna end up
I
getting
didn't ask to be
like
born
some more
mixed.
today.
But we're God's children. I don't want to blame anyone for what somebody else's sins were during that day. If we're going to get along, we're going to have to learn to work with everyone, because the masses of the people are not like us. They need us to help them. And I want to help them. That's why in our home up there, my niece stay right next door to me. There's a gun in their room for the four-legged people, things like them deers taking over their farm, and the two-legged ones too, because you never know what people are up to.
Where's
And then
Glue?
when you're down in those woods, and we live in a lane,
Glue?
it's very private.
Gloves that you can
You
put
don't know
on,
who else coming like
and
the back of the
brick
woods.
walls, it won't
So
hurt
they
you.
know
You can stick
that,
your
that
hand
we
inside
we
the
defend
fire.
ourselves.
It won't burn you or
Yes.
burn the glue.
So unlike most
you
people,
punch
I
glass
like guns.
or hit it with a hammer.
I'm not gonna have a gun on my. I don't have a pickup truck, but I don't want to put it on my rack. I don't want to do that. But I have it for a purpose. I think you have a right to defend yourself. Because if you didn't, I wouldn't be living today. People know that we believe we have guns. We will defend our property.
Was your house ever shot at in the
I saw
movie?
that video.
Yes.
Somebody had posted
1968.
about the
There was so much going on
There was in Georgia.
prior to 1964.
Yeah.
I left here in 66.
There you
Mr.
go.
Damer died January 10th, 66.
There was some Georgia.
I finished school here in 66 and got a scholarship to St. John's Episcopal School of Nursing in New York City.
Suburbs or some shit where it's like 500 white
But
people, 2 black
before
people.
1964,
And then, they said the black people
we
that
had,
they had
gosh,
took $5,000
the hotel downtown, Forest Hotel, we had Judge Higginbotham was the speaker. We had integrated that. We had gone to a hotel for lunch or breakfast or something out here on 49. And I was stealth. Now, you know the word stealth. You're doing things, but you're hiding as you do it. I was the first person hired at the telephone company. They put me on nights, and I had no one to keep my children at night. My husband was mentally ill and not with me anymore. And
if this happened,
I couldn't take a job where I had no one to take care of my children. So I told them I couldn't take it. But I had made that first step, which meant other people stepped up. Joyce Brown, who is now Yarborough, stepped up and went and got a job. And that was her job her whole life. She worked at the telephone company. I was the first one hired by Sears. Now, this was with the knowing of the NAACP. Somebody had to know where you were. So we knew that there was someone in the group that would tell everything. So there was just maybe 4 or 5 of us who would plan to do things. And there was a place for everyone. Many of the people who did things are dead and gone. Will never get any recognition. The first clerk hired at Sears, they put me in shipping and receiving so nobody had to look at me. But one day, the candy girl didn't come in. I don't know if you remember Sears, and they had a little candy shop, the little candy place in the middle of the store. The candy girl didn't come in. So the cleanup lady was asked, and she worked at Sears out here after they moved it to the mall. She retired from there. They asked her, "You think you could sell candy?" So I had made a step, and which opened up a place and for other people. I was the first one hired by Big Yank, which made
Clothes.
they wore
Jeans.
and shirt, work clothes. and we went to the permanent press.
Yep.
They had 400 women working, sewing,
Do something like
cutting
this,
and
or
sewing.
crowns or something like that.
They refused to work with
Outfits,
blacks.
Gave y'all ratings,
I bugged them down at the unemployment office to the point of climbing across the man's desk and getting right up in his face. I know there's a job up in here somewhere for me other than Miss Ann's kitchen or working in a restaurant. And when you worked in a restaurant, you couldn't even work out in the where the tables were. If you did, you only bust tables, and you had to do that with gloves, white gloves. They gave the federal book to me, and that's what woke me up to the fact that I need some more education. I had a high school diploma, but that was all, and I had 3 babies. So when I went to Big Yank, they finally hired me, and they sent me back and forth. And I'm walking. I don't have a car. There's no buses going back from Big Yank over to Walnut Street where the unemployment office was. They finally hired me, and the floor walker said, my supervisor said, go out and find yourself 3 other gals to work with you, because we're going to have to put you on evenings. The other ladies won't work with you. 400 of them. Well, my plan, I did. I went out and got 3 others. They ran a whole shift with a floor walker, a supervisor, and they had one gentleman who ran this heating machine that the clothes went through to become permanent press. And we got in this, and we went and joined the Amalgamated Clothing Union, which was right down the street. It's a Korean church right now. We had this competition going. We will press everything you sew. And it was a big chute coming from upstairs down. And we'd walk in and we'd see all these shirts and bundles of 25, 50, whatever they were. They couldn't sew enough shirts during the day. When we learned how to run those machines, and the floor walker told me, you're machinist number 1, but you're too short to run that machine. And I started looking around and said, you have a little box? Stepped up on that little box. We got used to doing what we had to do to those shirts. I was the first one to handle them. I pressed the body and then the collars and the shirts, and the last 4th girl pinned them and with the paper that they put in the cardboard. We got so good. The rule under the union was, if you finished your piecework before the 8 hours, you could still get paid for 8 hours. Believe, they couldn't sew enough shirts to keep us there more than 6, 8 hours.
You must have loved that.
And we'd strut out at 11 o'clock at night, and I'd walk home. And I walked in the shadows because you didn't want to be out in the light where somebody could shoot you. Because they definitely would.
You
She
mentioned
take a lot of her videos off the TikTok. She got some, off other websites.
It was your first exposure, I guess.
It tipped me that I was different, and that Mississippi and other places, even Chicago, was a place that maybe you should be afraid,
She just used me
and that people hated you.
to interact with the.
I had gone to a church with my mother, and it was a table similar to this, and we were sitting over here, and a little boy, about 4, 5 years old maybe, he'd crawl underneath and he'd get right there and he'd look up at me and say, nigga, nigga. Now I know the other women who were all white, besides me and my mother, at that table heard that child. They never said a word to him.
Was that in Chicago?
That was in Chicago. And I was in Chicago. I picked up Jet magazine, and it wasn't on the front cover, was it? Was it the centerfold? Whichever one it was.
Probably so.
He was in the casket.
Yeah.
And it frightened me so much. I threw down the magazine, the Jet magazine, and ran out of the store and ran all the way home. And I said, Mama, they killed the boy in Mississippi. For Mama, it wasn't news. It wasn't that it wasn't news. She wasn't affected, but it affected me so much. I said, and Mama had always said, if they did anything to one of my boys or my husband, I would get jobs at nursing homes and hospitals, and I would poison up a lot of people. So my family, I'd grown up when I was in the country with the shotgun sitting there. You protected your family. My mother had always said, they better not do anything to one of my boys. And to see this child having that done, because I always said, you wouldn't take my grandchild out of my house. They'd have had to take me that night. But they lied. Or maybe the family was afraid, the grandparents, or whatever it was. But they wouldn't have gotten one of my brothers out of the house unless they'd have killed everyone in the house. We had done many, many things. Her husband built a clinic here in Hattiesburg. The building is still there. He built the clinic because he was a black doctor. And the hospital, Forest General Hospital, it was called Methodist Hospital. It's now Merritt Wesley out on 98. They would, if he had a client that needed to go into the hospital, he had to turn him over to a white doctor. That's how bad it was. When all three of my babies were born at Forest General. I don't know about yours.
Just one.
Just one. Mm-hmm. The charity hospital was up in Laurel, and it was in the basement. You had to walk through the furnace room and the laundry stuff to get to where the colored folks were. And you could have TB, gunshot, babies born. Everything was down there in that dark, dingy basement with no light. Forest General, there was a floor. It's now a hallway on the way. Yes, now a hallway on the back side of the cafeteria. Everyone was put there because my mother was who she was. Now let's see, Phelps, who was a white doctor at Hattiesburg Clinic, was our physician, and he would give us a 5 o'clock appointment. So we didn't have to go in that little back room and sit and wait until they saw all the white patients.
You said because your mother was who she was. Can you explain?
Being a white father and a black mother.
So that the doctor was willing to give her a little privilege.
We got privileges. Now, Bill Thacker, Dr. Thacker was our dentist. His house is on the corner of Broadway, and what's that side street? It's right across from where the Catholic high school is right now.
Southern.
Big brick fence around that house. And Bill Thacker, his wife, went to the church until she died, where I go now. And I asked Bill, I said, Bill, why did you all put that big brick wall around your house? They had 2 girls, and the Klan had threatened them. They were going to kidnap those girls and kill them because he took black patients. We have been terrorized for as long as we've been here. We have been fighting this fight for as long as we've been here. It goes on today.
You said that your mother always said that if anybody did anything to her sons
or her husband, she was going to get revenge.
She believed in self-defense.
It's self-defense.
That's what
okay.
we call it.
She was more worried about the males in the family.
Oh,
Oh,
women,
Can you
we
explain?
couldn't go into a restaurant and go to the bathroom or anything like that downtown here. You couldn't go to a hotel. But you could get a job when your man could. It was different.
Can you explain it for people that didn't experience it?
Oh, gosh.
You know what I'm asking?
Like your daddy, he worked the farm or hired out to work for somebody white. My daddy wasn't a carpenter. When he went into the Navy,
And not to mention, you have the AI.
he was one of those Mississippians who not only could read but write, and he had beautiful handwriting. So he was trained to be a teacher
I mean, you know how to do
in
the AI character.
service, an instructor they called them in service. And they only sent people that could boost their numbers because most whites out of Mississippi at that time, and it's well documented, could not read or write.
In the military was having trouble, right? Because
Oh,
people
yes.
weren't educated enough.
That weren't
Is this
educated
what that
enough.
was about, was trying to-
And do you know we're back to that now? Especially out of the state of Mississippi, they have a problem recruiting because there's so many people young men who can't read and write. They might have finished school or got a GED. There are two types of GEDs. I didn't realize that. There's just one where you attend, you get a certificate of attendance, and one where you get a high school diploma.
I think that's a new development, isn't it?
It's been there all the time.
Really?
We just didn't know it.
Yeah, I don't know
I think it's a
nothing about that.
But see,
qualified vehicle.
their funds in when they're a certain age, 18, I think 20. They might go up to 20. Well, see, they got to get them out of school. So they just pass them, whether they really passed or not. And then they try to put them in vocational school. That's the whole idea.
But you have to read to get even into a vocation.
But they had a system.
At
Moving
one
them on and getting
time.
that money.
But now many companies cannot get workers who can read and who can write. And yes, it's like jail. Jail has become a business.
Right.
As Jeanette stated, long before the students and the freedom riders came to town or came to Mississippi in the South, we were fighting and were very successful.
I was wondering if you all could tell me about the early NAACP, because you were both involved with it, right?
She went on the nursing school. We were very active on all levels. Because we're so active, we're the largest member in the state. Life members. And in my resume, that's what I dealt with. And I touched on that. So, because of our activities, and we were known, Forest County was a fighting county. That's why everybody came here. And like I was saying, it's just amazing how they came here. And some of the stories and books that are written should be the stories of the people they stayed with. And, that's a shame that they didn't even give them credit for it. As if they just came here, spent this on another thing that bothered me more than anything else. They had funds to help them. They never gave them anything on groceries. It was just a transfer like they were going to Africa to help the African. But when you came home, or you didn't really help them, because you were eating their food. I know when I fed them, and then that's why we had the kitchen down on Mobile Street. Miss Campbell, Miss Fairley, and her sister, Miss Boyd, and myself, I was down there trying to cook. That's how I learned to cook.
Pinky Hall and
Pinky
her
Hall.
sister.
So was this during the summer, so you all had a kitchen?
This was before.
This was before.
This was before.
Was this when the ministers
From
were coming in?
62, from the minister started in
61.
61, that's right, you're right.
So,
Yeah.
so you also, that was like cooking for the voter registration?
For the workers, they were hungry.
Yeah.
You know, because we knew that the people, if they housed them and to keep them safe and nobody bombed their house, they probably would, the house could have been destroyed. They could have lost a lot of things by just helping those civil rights workers. So we had to organize in the community. You had, the churches were so wonderful. You had summer school, vacation Bible school. And they were cooking at the church. So what we did, the churches gave us food, then we began to cook over there on Mobile
And you
Street
get back to doing what I was
to
doing.
feed the workers.
So you saying we, and we organized, right?
Yeah,
Can you, so
we did the ECB.
okay, so the NAACP,
Yeah.
Even though we married and became COFO,
Mm.
the NAACP led.
can I ask, when did you all first learn about the NAACP? Do you remember?
I've known about it all my life.
Was your family members?
They were not members because we lived
Mine
in the
were.
country. They didn't have a branch out there. But the Laurel had a branch, Dr. Murph. We just never joined.
But you
But
knew,
we supported. We gave them money. You know, we always, when they Freedom
Yeah.
Fund Drive, we always gave them money.
was that true for your family too, Ms. Branch?
It was, I learned that one of my grandmothers, both my grandmothers, they had stuck their receipts at cheap, the least expensive one used to be $15,
Gee,
10. Their receipts were stuck in the Bible.
right.
And I was going through their Bibles, and that's how I found out they were members of the NAACP.
You know, in Claiborne, they used to burn the cards when they would come.
Oh.
Because they were afraid.
That someone would get them. I don't think my grandmother was too afraid of the police, and I wasn't afraid of the police.
We were.
And now, of course, I was just plain listed as crazy. You know, I did things
you know what
because I
happened?
was crazy.
Jones County being one of those places where the Klan was. See, the Klan was like this. They would go to other communities and terrorize them. They wouldn't kill in their own community. They were scared to come out there in Jones County because we knew who were behind them sheets. We knew who they were. So my grandfather, we were up there in so meeting, and honey, he put on his sheet and went up there and ran all up there. Because you couldn't tell him because he was a mixture of white and Indian.
So he's
So-
infiltrating the Klan.
Yeah, he said, you know I know you. He pulled all them sheets off their face. And they were getting ready to come down in Forest County and raid these people down here. Because they had so many kinfolks up there. They didn't want to kill their own folk. But it's just amazing how terrorists think. You know, and those are the same people that where we live, my father's people, we down there with the Musgroves. We with all of them. Once the Musgroves came to join New Knight's deserters. So that's
now
how they came.
Is that the same as Governor Musgrove?
That was my cousin.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he did tell that to me once.
Did he tell you that?
Yeah,
He tell you that?
yeah. Because I was campaigning for him at one time.
Right.
Musgrove was all right.
Well, what happened, I was up there in a meeting with him, and, see, like I say, you were terrorized. The reason that I survived, I know my people claim me. New Knight is the father on my grandfather's birth certificate. They claimed the children. They gave them land. So that's how I survive. I don't have to worry about who I am because they will tell you, oh, that's my cousin.
So they would sort of put the little protection out.
Yeah, you don't mess with it.
Yeah, there were certain people you did not mess
Amen.
with
Because they had white kin.
because
No,
their
because
daddies and their
Newt would kill 'em.
granddaddies were who
Newt
they
would
were.
kill 'em.
Yeah.
If he messed with any of his people, he would kill him.
There's a poster. We had it here during one event.
Okay.
Back, let me see, I first got the poster. It was just a flyer. 2, 4, 6, about 6 pages, folded in trifold. And that's when I learned that my grandfather had gone to register to vote when we started registering downtown
That's right,
at
I saw his
Theron
picture.
Lynn.
Tell me something about your grandfather that you just recently learned.
Papa Blue.
Can you say his full name for the record?
Lee Val Graves.
And
Leeval Graves, Graves. Lee Val Graves.
so you found the record that he had.
We had a
Tell me-
Oh,
picture
it
of
was
it.
a picture.
Oh,
I remember
Someone had
up
sent
there.
the flyer to me from Washington to D.C. They had a big conference in Washington. And he and another guy were standing there at Theron Lynn's counter,
Office. Mhm.
the same counter I had gone to answer my Constitution question. I was registered first. I was the youngest. I think I was the youngest one to register in Forest County.
Probably were.
When I got to be 21, I went down there.
Right.
But at that
What
time,
year would that have been? Was it you say?
I was
I
born in
was-
41,
so-
so
so
51,
62?
61, 62.
But I was registered in '61. See, I'm
Okay.
I'm older than she. I was born in 1940.
Can tell us what it was like to go to register.
Oh, I had 3 big men at my back.
Who did you have?
Mr. J.C. Fairley, Mr. James Bourne, and Mr. Vernon Damer.
Is that Mr. Bourne? Is he kin to Miss Connor? No, Gould. I'm sorry.
You're
I'm
talking
mistaking the
about
names.
Peggy Jean Gould,
No,
Mr.
my
Gould.
mistake. Yeah.
Uh,
So you said it was Mr. Bourne,
James Bourne,
Mr. Farley.
J.C. Fairley,
Was the Bill born?
and Mr. Damer.
So they came with you when you.
Standing right at my back. See, Theron Lynn, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of him.
But please describe him for us.
Really fat.
Huge guy, about like this.
Really
About
fat.
6'3", 4".
Mm.
But he had a tiny little head, so
Oh,
he had
wait,
this
no,
huge person with the tiny
400
little
pounds.
head. And he would walk back and forth and he would say, "This is your question. Can you answer this constitutional question?" And I wrote that, because, Ms. Chambers had prepared us well on the Constitution. And I wrote, and finally he walks up and takes it and says, and handed it to a clerk and said, "She passed." He didn't even read it.
When you say you were well prepared, was that your school teacher? Or was
School
that
teacher.
Yeah.
Ms. Marjorie Chambers was our world history teacher, and she did a lot with us knowing about the Constitution and things like that.
Was she specifically trying to prepare you to register, or was that part of her teaching?
No, that was just part of Ms. Chambers' teaching. In fact, she was one of those teachers when they quote unquote integrated the schools. They pulled her out of the black school and sent her over to the white school because she was a good teacher. And there was a law on the books, and I don't know if it's still there, and I say people should look to see. I should look to see if it's still there. If there was something that you wanted to do that wasn't taught in Mississippi, you could be sit out of the state, and the state would pay the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And I'll just say for the record, this is before Brown, and this is when they were trying to avoid
Integration.
desegregating the schools.
Yes.
And they thought that way they could avoid the whole separate but equal.
yes.
That's why my husband went to medical school.
Did he?
Mhm.
On one of the
Really?
scholarships?
I didn't know that.
Did he go to?
Well, he thought he was, but
Uh-huh.
his grandfather was Jewish, and they really had sent him to school. We didn't know that until after we were married. He was trying to pay his loan back, and they told him, you don't have a loan. So he came down here with Dr. Parrish because he was trying to pay off state of Mississippi. And there was such a need for medical care till he just stayed. Dr. Parrish, he couldn't take it. He had to go back to Chicago.
Mhm.
Where was your husband from?
He was from Memphis,
Memphis. And so he came here to pay off his school
along from Tennessee.
and then stayed. So did he go to Meharry?
He went to Mary. And it's just and now that we're talking about him, it's amazing. When he first came, he was trying to take the license, to get his license. And then he had to go up on the freight elevator. But when he got up in there, he took tests with everybody else. He said he was determined when he came back, he was going to integrate Forest Hill. It was county hospital. He made a complaint with HEW. He was going to integrate Methodist. He was going to integrate them doctor's office. Just as soon as they started taking Medicare, that federal money, he was going to integrate everything. And basically, that's what he did.
Did he ever work with the Medical Committee on Human Rights? Is that what it's called? It was some of the doctors that came into the civil rights movement was Dr.
Mason.
Smith up in
You remember
Jackson.
Yeah.
Marion Wright?
Right.
She was part of that group.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did or not because
He was so busy.
he wasn't thinking about that.
I think
He was trying to do what he had to do.
When he was working so hard, he eventually became the president of the
He did.
NAACP. But I wasn't here then. But before I left, he was busy
Delivering babies.
because in that clinic, as she said, babies were born there. When we got Head Start, and that's a whole nother story, I sent a busload of children to Lady Bird Johnson to Washington to keep until we got Head Start. They kept saying we were, it was a communist movement, and I had made the comment one night to Robert Beach. We were on the phone, and I said, Robert, I'm having a hard time here. I don't have a car. Some days I don't have money to get on the bus, and I have no money to put my children in daycare. I said, and the few daycares, they had to charge them. They were out of business.
They had a business.
And I didn't have the money. I said, you know what? I ought to send them to Washington. If I had the money, I could send them to the White House because she had maids and cooks, and it's a big house.
She can take care of
And
it.
Lady Bird could take care of them. And he called back the next day, and I still don't know where that money came from. He called back the next day and said, Raylawni, were you serious about sending your children to the White House? I said, yeah, I was serious, but he said, can you get enough children to fill up a Greyhound bus? I said, to go to Washington? He said, yeah. He said, and I need women to go with them to take care of the children because they were preschoolers.
Right.
They were 5 and under. And it was January, and we sent those poor children to Washington, D.C. without caps and gloves and hats, and it snowed. And someone on that end, women met those children with the proper clothing and boots and stuff. And I have a picture of only 2 of them went because Timothy was in school over at Eton, sitting on the floor of the House of Representatives. But we sent a busload of children. We got Head Start after that.
Good.
And I was a resource teacher for Head Start.
Excuse me, was it in Mississippi already? Was CDGM in here, or was that?
No,
CDGM?
that was
before.
that was
It
before.
was before that?
Oh,
That was before.
we were doing a whole lot of things before The one thing I learned from the students and people coming in, I don't have anything really bad to say. I learned that not all white people were bad.
They're not.
Up until then, they were devils. They would, excuse me, they would stick it in any hole. That's what I thought.
That's
They,
the sin in people.
huh?
That's the sin in people. They need to be converted.
But we did so much. I give them credit. I learned from them that not all people are bad. But as she said, they came for an experience. Now, there were some people who went back and did some wonderful things. Jill Wakeman, who stayed with that lady that lived on the corner of Tipton and some street off over there in East Jerusalem. Jill Wakeman was her maiden name. She married, but she still goes under Jill Wakeman if you look her up on anywho.com. She opened the biggest soup kitchen. It's still running in San Francisco, I believe. They had her on 60 Minutes or 48 Hours or something like that. She and a native, a girl of Chinese extraction, her name was Marion,
Can't remember what was it. I know.
it's so long. But Jill, I won't forget because Jill sent $10 in an envelope to me the 2.5 years I was in school in New York. And that's what I lived on in New York City, $10 a month. And she opened this food kitchen, and it's still one of the biggest food kitchens in America.
The reason I asked about the Medical Committee for Human Rights was when you mentioned that your husband was determined to integrate those hospitals, because I can't remember which law it was, but one of those laws that was
October
passed as part of the law on
1582
poverty
calendar.
was bringing the federal money into the hospitals.
Is that right?
And they were using that as the leverage, and so I just wondered if he might have had any contact with them over integrating
Well, he
the
did. They were
hospitals.
friends of his. He worked with them, Dr. Mason and Dr. Smith and all of them.
Okay,
They had a organization among themselves.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
there was
yeah.
no one group.
And see, my husband, the
Why
people
does
in
the
Laurel were
October
wonderful.
15,
They had a black
82
hospital.
calendar goes from the
He transferred
4th day
his
to
patients
the
up there.
15th day.
That's how he met me.
What happened to the days
And
in between?
what hospital was that?
The Benevolent Hospital up in Laurel.
I didn't know about it.
That's a black hospital. Wonderful. My daddy and my uncle had built a church in Lucedale, and they contacted pneumonia. So my first cousin and I went down for the dedication of the church. So these little black doctors were down there. And my husband was single and the other one was married. So I thought I was on my way to
How much
Dillard
younger
University. And I wasn't looking for no
Is
husband.
everyone.
So my husband told my daddy, now that's the one I want. So
did he talk to you?
no, he didn't say a word to me. Came out with my first cousin from So-So, teaching down in Pascagoula. That's how they recruited their patients. So anyway, he checked. I said, oh, I'm so glad you came. You can check
How
my
does 10
daddy.
days go
Daddy had
missing, but
pneumonia.
no one is
Put him
younger?
dead in the
About 10 days.
hospital. And so he was courting me through my daddy. Because my husband,
So was your daddy going to be in trouble if you wasn't there?
no, but my daddy was trying to get me married off.
Well, you didn't talk to the girl first.
No, he
You
talked to
you
the
talked
dad.
to the family.
So he was just boosting me up, and I heard him in there saying, well, if you get her, you get the right one.
That's what your daddy
Yeah.
was saying?
She might be young, but she's
So
very
it's
mature.
like,
She's been
it didn't
taking
stop time,
care of my business and stuff.
but it
She's
added
been
days
40 when she was born.
to the week, which
So
means
things like that. I'm listening to him
time
talking about
sped
me.
up
So that's how I met him.
from the
And I
4th
found out he was a
day
very nice
to the
person.
15th day.
You know, and I really liked him. And I said, thank my daddy for finding me a husband.
So did you still go off to Dillard?
No, I didn't. I got married within 4 months.
Did you miss going off to Dillard?
Not really, because, you know, education is a continuing thing. You don't have to have those letters to know that you are
So even
a
though
sponge,
time went
that you're
forward,
learning everything come through your way.
10 to
And
11
my
days,
husband made me see that. Then I went down to Green Carry for a
you're
while.
trying to force people to
And I
believe
had 3
that they
little
are not
children.
11
And
days
it was just
younger.
hard on me. So my husband was saying, why are you doing this? You don't have to have any letters behind your name. You're already my advisor. You're everybody's advisor in Hattiesburg. So then I said, well, some people, maybe that's not for me. But I thought about going back. But like I said, education is something, if you have it within you, you just have it. You don't have to prove that to anyone, unless you're looking for a particular job or something. But I never had no problem. I integrated the tax assessor's office in 1976.
Yeah, you became.
First July. I worked down there with their and Lynn.
So you got elected in '76.
No, that was
You were
my first.
hired?
They were hired.
They were hired.
I was elected in 90, I think 92. Something.
Okay, so who hired you over there?
Well, it was political.
Yeah,
My
everything's political.
my neighbor was named Henry McFall. He made sure he integrated everybody. If he supported a candidate, he was going to have a job out of him. So Mr. Byrd hired me because Henry recommended me. And it worked out real well.
So if he was going to get support from the black community for voting, he
Yeah.
was going to have to hire somebody that was
Yeah,
kind of the
that's a
deal.
political payoff.
So what was it like to work in the office with Theron Lind?
Well, he and I became friends because, see, once he didn't have that power, and then, he was a diabetic, and I would come home and eat. And so he wanted me to go down to Mobile Street and get him some food. And I said, okay, now, if I'm late coming in, you vouch for me. I would bring him food back, and I wouldn't get him all that stuff he wanted, because he did begin to lose weight. But, that's why you have to do forgiveness. He had a job to do. He had to do that.
To
keep his job.
Yes.
He had the Sovereign Commission. He had to do that. So he apologized to me
Did he?
Oh, really?
for his behavior. He did.
Wow.
I would stop by. He would go in the little downstairs on the right side, and I'd go out there and take me a break and talk to him. Because some things I wanted
I
to
would
know.
never have thought you would have been Darren Lynn's friend.
I was. And I saw somebody else, that old Klansman down, that old lawyer. What is his name?
Jimmy Dukes?
No, not Dukes. He all right.
He's all right.
That one down there behind Jimmy Dukes. The Klansman. I can't think
They
his
were
name.
all Klansmen
But
back
anyway,
then.
what happened was,
Jimmy
way back,
Dukes.
I was trying to do my mission work, and they had butane tanks in Palmer's Crossing before they incorporated. So I was trying to get some gas for these poor people who were freezing to death. So anyway, I did one-on-one. I would go by Mr. Roberts, the one that the stadium named after, all the politicians. And I told them, what I want you to do, don't give me any money, but go down there to the butane company, and I want you to put 100 gallons and leave it open, and I'm going to refer them to the people that need it. And it's amazing how generous they were in helping me with the people.
So that was so people could have fuel to heat their home?
They didn't have any heat. They couldn't cook. They was cooking on butane.
So you could get the whites to donate money that way, or to
They
pay
did.
for the gas?
I had one lady, I can't even call her name today because she won't let me, even though she's deceased. I would go by there and she would have me a bag of $1,000.
This is a white lady?
White lady. And then he would call and tell me, I'm never supposed to tell her name. I would go by these houses and I said, Doc, send your little old wife out here. I got something for you. So we had to buy food to feed the people.
Yeah, during those years, late 50s to let's say till I left, I know there were many people, what we call white people, who were sympathizers and who was family. And when Robert Beach used to go out, they would meet at midnight or after
Get money.
to get money, but they couldn't be seen by anybody in the
It'd be
community.
cash.
So, and it had to be cash, of course.
Cash.
But
What would
It-
happen to a white person if they publicly stood with the movement?
they probably would be killed, or they would never have a job.
I
or
mean, a
anything
recent
like
one,
that.
the young man, the clerk for the city,
Oh, yeah.
you know, he went over and threatened him, and he resigned because they didn't want him to be the clerk for Johnny Dupree,
Oh,
Mr. Meyer.
oh yes.
They ran him away.
He's African American.
No, no,
he's a
no.
white
I'm
man.
talking about Mr. Dupree.
They don't want him.
Our mayor is a man of color, yes.
Yeah, he is.
He lives right
Now,
down the
see,
street from me.
It's amazing.
So they didn't want the white clerk to work for him.
Well,
Was
they
that
didn't
right?
want him to be on his side and
Okay.
do
He
anything
was on
that
his
was
side.
going to help him. See,
I see.
he had enough. He was in a position where he really knew what they were doing. We have some that we really need to get out.
This is
But they just fired. They gave him such a hard time.
well, he resigned.
Yeah, he resigned.
The young man that have it now, he really is a Republican. He's black,
Yeah.
but they see that they had to do the same thing that my friend did, make sure that the white Republicans gave him that job because he was the most qualified person.
Uh-huh.
So the lead guy's there now.
Oh, they are so upset about that.
Oh, he nice little guy.
Oh, you're talking about Kermit?
Kermit,
Yes,
I love him.
yes.
When you all went to register to vote, was that when the lawsuit was going on?
Yes. When I went
That
to
was the
register,
second lawsuit.
this was the
Yeah,
second one.
yeah.
And then you had one really before that in the 50s.
This is the one that the Justice Department was part of.
Yeah, this one was from a private attorney out of Macomb, the first one in the 50s.
Yeah.
But now, I went in the reason I know it was 1961, because I just made 21. I couldn't register until then. A friend of mine and I, we were bold and bad. We weren't going with nobody. We were going by ourselves. So when we got down there, the old kitchen, this constable, I thought he was going to block us.
Uh-huh.
He opened the door for us, said, "You better just come on in."
Mm-hmm.
Say, and you can just go in and register. I said, "Really?"
And they just let you go
Yeah,
in.
because
and-
they had filed a suit. The Justice Department
Oh,
told them
yes.
to register anybody come in the door.
Oh,
We had already registered.
And they let you?
Yeah, we went in and registered. We didn't have to take no test or nothing.
Were your family people? Were
isn't
they
that
registered?
something?
My husband refused to register until everybody else did because they sent for him to come register. They had 12 on record. He said, "I'm not registering until all of my people are registered."
So they were trying to use them to say they weren't discriminating.
Yeah, that's what they were saying.
And there's always the thought, whether you are black or white, the vote really wasn't for poor folks, ignorant folks. It was only for
It was
the
very elite. It was
gentleman.
kind of a privilege almost.
The gentleman.
The
Yeah,
gentleman.
yes. You were a landowner. You had to be a landowner to be a gentleman and have money. So it was only for gentlemen in the beginning. That's why I chuckle when people say, well, the Constitution. Say, the Constitution doesn't mean the same to me as it might to you.
That's why they let the Willows register, because they had a lot of land. He was on. He was there. It was 12 of them. Mr. Berger was one of them.
Yes,
Yeah.
but look at who they were.
I know, but
Mr.
they had
Berger
just a
was-
few, just to
Yeah,
say
just
that
a
they didn't
few.
discriminate.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah.
but I love Mr. Berger, because it was Mr. Berger, Professor Todd, and Mr. Newcastle is the one that integrated there. Dr. Newcastle.
Yeah, they
They
got
integrate.
together to integrate,
They did.
quote unquote, integrate William Carey.
And his other.
But we didn't. There was no.
They
They didn't
paved
get.
the way
They
back.
didn't.
They
yeah.
were
Yeah.
the background people.
Wow.
See, in the movement, you had different kinds of people, because you had to communicate with them. You had the biracial committee after the boycott. So some people could communicate with others
Yeah.
and could get them to do what the movement people were so bold and and everything. They were so demanding till the people that had to make the change, all those merchants, they were afraid of them.
When people like Stokely Carmichael, who became Touré, came to town, and there was a mass meeting. Anytime any of those kinds of people would come in, there would be a mass meeting. They were what we considered really radical. You know, I would go down and I had a pee in once. Excuse me again, sir. my we had gone up above Jackson there, and we planned to take up an Air Force base up in North Mississippi, which we did. But I told them, I can't, because I have 3 children I have to take care of. I need to stay alive. And I really believed that the United States would kill them all. I just thought, when they get on that base, they're going to kill them. But they froze them out. And on the way back from that particular meeting,
Was Father Queen with you? Father Queen. Was he there?
Yes.
Well,
He
was-
might, yeah, a
He
queen.
ungraded everything. This Catholic priest and those children.
He would tell a lot of stuff too. He was a stoolie. I stopped at a service station. Children had to go to the bathroom. It was me and one of those singing boys, Watts girls. She lived down on Mobile Street.
Mm.
Mary. Anyway, she was one that went to Washington with the children, and the children had to go to the bathroom. Stopped at this little service station, and I asked for the key. And he said, "Why, ain't no lock on the washroom back there for the colored folks. You see it back there?" I said, "I want the key to the ladies' room right there." He said, "Oh, no, you can't use that. That's for white folks only." And I said, "Children, pee right there." And we peed, and I had them all pee in the door. We had to pee in.
What do you do?
Nothing.
I can't believe she. Do you see what?
They had to go to the bathroom.
You reckon he gave the
And
next person the key?
I said, "Now
She
the
may
next time someone asks for that key, you give the key to them, and you won't have a pee in."
You wasn't worried?
No.
No. You didn't have sense to be worried?
I didn't have sense enough to be
But she had
afraid.
a mission. I'm telling you.
I didn't have sense enough
It
to
was
be
a
afraid.
it was a mission.
People ask that question about us coming out here. Weren't you afraid? We did everything we could to get rid of the bodyguards. After we found out one of them was the guy that tried to kill me once back in '62, I said, "Elaine, one of the bodyguards is that police officer that tried to kill me." Well, I guess not many people could tell a story like this now, because they will kill you. But I was getting my children from my grandmother's. My husband and I had gone to the movies. About 10 o'clock at night, when I went to knock on the door, this thing jumps up out of the dark at the edge of the porch, cuts the screen, opens the screen, and kicks in the hard door. And my husband was so afraid of white people. I mean, I didn't have that fear. He did.
But it did.
And 2 of the children were in a bed over in the corner, and he had Johnny, who was 6 months old. That's how I remember it so well. Johnny was born in April, and it was October. And my husband said, "Hurry up." And he took the police officer, backhanded him with his flashlight, and it just missed my baby's head. Well, I was mad as a hatter. I said, "Why don't you hit somebody that's not holding a baby?" And he was a big guy. He picked up a small lamp table next to my great-grandmother's bed, hit it up against the wall and broke it, and come at me with the leg. Well, I had long hair then, but I had it in a bun up on top of my head. And when he hit me, that cushioned, but I scared him by running into him. And I was 94 pounds, and he was about 300. And he fell on me, and we fell back on the bed. And I could feel his gun, and it wasn't locked. It wasn't locked in the scabbard. I pulled that gun out and I stuck it in his belly. I said, if you don't get off of me, I will shoot you. And his partner pulled the gun on everybody else. I said, do you think there's 5 boys standing up here and 2 men and several women? Do you think they're going to ever let you get out of here? We will cut you up in little bitty pieces and put you in that toilet hole out there. And we'll take that car and drop it in the river. So you best get off of me. He backed up off of me. I said, now we can go downtown and call the chief. And we went downtown to where the old police station is in City Hall. And I got on the phone and called the White House. They said, when you get into trouble, call the White House. I believed it. I called the White House. And the Attorney General got on the phone. Who was it then? Oh, help me out here. This is 62.
Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, John Doerr, were you talking to?
No, it wasn't Kennedy. Kennedy was after that.
Another coach.
Anyway, the Attorney General got on the phone. And I said, I am Raylawni Young. I am at the police station in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and a police officer tried to kill me. And I could hear the operators laughing on the phone. They were listening from right here in Hattiesburg. Because they said, you want what? I said, I want the White House and I want it right now. I'm supposed to call the White House right now. That's how we knew the boys were dead up there in Meridian. Because if you didn't call when you got where you were going, no, you did. They said, get this crazy woman out of here. They took me home with my 3 children and arrested my husband, who had done nothing.
Woman dancing underneath the bridge. Let's do
What kind of things
it to
were you
her.
involved with at that
Liz
point?
is her name. She's an incredible dancer.
After that,
and
everything.
really
What
one
were
of
you
the
doing before that?
premier video girls
So
that
much going on.
was
There
happening
was so
in the
much
90s.
going
And
on.
she came
But
in
after
and we
that,
have her on the show. We do. She's
I was officially on the books as the as the secretary of the Forest County.
Right.
I went and joined.
We also need to just
I had never paid that money. Supported, but I never paid that money. I joined the NAACP. Later on, I worked with all those groups that became COFO. Because, we were doing one thing, they were doing another. But when people came to town, like Teray, who were very, very radical, we would say, Hattiesburg not for you. Be,
Is that after the Maryland March, or would this be like during the
That was
63, 64, 65?
yeah, that was that time frame.
Big legs dancing.
When
So the
people-
marching really escalated after the death of Medgar Evers. And then when Mr. Charles came down, he was so mad with everybody. And he had them 2 guns on him.
Yeah.
Wherever Charles Evers, he had deacons for defense everywhere to protect the people. Now that's when white people really got scared because he's crazy.
No, he wasn't. He wasn't any crazier than I was.
But I'm saying,
But he
they'll say
he
you
did.
crazy.
Yeah, they'll call you
So,
crazy
he-
and supposedly let you get away with stuff.
he went out to this little motel and he got out there. He said, what am I doing out here? I done integrated now. And tell them cheering there, get out of their room now. I got to come in. I'm sleeping. I said, Mr. Evans, you going to put the children on the floor again? Yes, ma'am.
So you're telling me he would go integrate the hotel and then he'd come
And
leave
leave
me
me
go
go
sleep.
sleep. He knew where he was
He wanted
safe.
some breakfast, and the children know, they knew what to do. See, I had twin beds, and I had the 1 bed with my son's bed. He slept in my son's room. So my son would have to sleep on the floor. and the getting up with the girls. So anyway, that was his room.
Yeah.
He wanted some breakfast. He would go show out and integrate and have them guns on him, and I felt so safe. I said, this is a man after my own heart. He said if anybody bothered us, he gonna go through and mow them down. Hit that oppressor.
I'm the last one. I'm the last one living now in Hattiesburg that went to the March on Washington.
I was
Verlin died.
Right. I couldn't go. I had
Well, yeah, you were like me. I got someone to keep the children.
I was gonna go with that Farrakhan group, but they told me that they had a bus, accessible bus,
Yeah.
out of Macomb.
Oh,
And I
see, I
checked
went
on
out
it.
of Greenville.
I checked on it. They didn't have it,
Oh,
so I was not. I put them on a van, over that rental van over there, that dimmer. They could go in the van. I wasn't going with them.
Did either of you all meet Medgar Evers when he would come through? When
oh
he was
yes,
here?
we knew
Can you-
Medgar.
Can you tell us about?
Medgar?
Mhm.
Oh gosh.
He was
He
dealing
was
in that
our
drugstore
field
all the time.
secretary, and he was
At the drugstore all the time.
he was
That was
a
a meeting
very he was a gentleman. I mean, he was mild, but
Very
he was
articulate,
serious, but very serious.
very scholar type person.
Was he organizing a youth branch in Hattiesburg at that time? I know there was one near Palmer's.
Oh, there were youth branches associated with every chapter.
Yeah.
It's always been.
We had one.
Were you all part of that, or?
No,
We
we
were
were
grown.
old ladies.
We were young. We were just
we
21
were young,
around.
had
When
children.
I first got
and-
married, I was just 19.
Yeah, I was 18.
Yeah, and then we lived in Palmer's Crossing down there by the lumber company. And somebody said, aren't y'all scared? I said, well, I think I'm waiting on them if they come. So I was at my house when they threw their skunk in my yard. And they said they were around there at Stillman. I said, okay. Come on, Ron. So you do know where I live, right? Yes, we know where you live. I said, well, I'm waiting for you. Come on. And they never showed up. Same thing, the little clock started ticking. You know, you call, that's when we got the doctor's exchange. So they would answer the phone for us. They harassed us when we first came here. Reverend Wooler didn't want us to join, we joined his church. He didn't want us to be a part of the movement. So we had to move our membership over to United Methodist Church of St. Paul.
What did he say to you all?
He didn't want this church to be burned. They had just burned down the Catholic Hall. And he was of that age, you know. He feared that they would destroy. He had a whole lot of stuff.
There weren't but about 6 ministers that supported what some people call the movement.
Just a few.
Just a few. Ponder,
St. Paul.
Grimmett from St. Paul.
Ebenezer.
Was Radler the pastor that was at
True Life.
True Light?
Just
True
a
Light
few.
and St. James.
Right.
Just a very few. Zion
They were
Chapel.
afraid that they would burn their church.
And they would. I mean,
They would have.
Yeah, they would have. But
That was a deacon for defense that kept it from doing that. From Okaloosa. They came up.
But
and
I thought
guarded us.
the few pastors that did and that let us use their church for mass meetings and then in '64 for Freedom Summer. I see Freedom Summer totally differently than many people.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, it was a summer. It was just, an event that happened where, as she said, we lived it every day.
Well, see, they came in. They were having vacation Bible school.
Duck McAdam.
The workers from the movement, when they all came together, and they sent everybody everywhere. Mostly they were teachers, musicians, and they integrated the libraries and stuff like that. So the churches, some of the churches in Mount Zion, they really didn't know that they were doing all that because they were in vacation Bible school and they lasted all the summer. They worked out of those churches. You had all kind of people who came here, but Hattiesburg was like if you came in, we protected everybody, and they felt safe staying with us.
But now North Mississippi is totally different. North Mississippi and West Mississippi, like over at Macomb, was different.
Right.
Where in Forest County, Jones County, we'd fight back.
Well,
Can you tell me about Mr. Damer?
Mr. Damon, one of his wives, his first wife, was related to me. And I have known the Damers when I was a little girl. I used to come downstairs with my great-great-uncle who lived down the street. And I was very familiar with Mr. Damer and his family because I called myself, when I was about 13, liking one of the sons. And he said, "You can't do that. That's your cousin." And I said, "Well, Mr. Damer, am I kidding everybody?" He said, "Just about."
Yeah, I couldn't marry anybody
if they
from
look
up
like
there.
if they look like us, you better check them out.
Yeah, check them.
And so anyway, I have known him all of my life. You know, he was just the kind of person that would help everybody, black and white. You know, he was a businessman. He had a lumber mill, and he was, a farmer. He would share with people his crops and stuff, and he just wanted to register to vote.
I think he was the first man of color here in Forest County, or first man period to own automatic cotton picker.
That's right.
He paid more for people who picked cotton for him,
Worked for him.
that worked for him on his farm. I didn't know his first wife, but I knew his first children.
Right.
And one of them is still living,
Right.
Vernon,
Junior.
and the other one died.
Still got
But
one
the night, February the 10th, 1966, was the day he died. January 10th, 1966. I was here. And that day, I told Dr. Fish, he was our advisor, and plus the work study, we had to work for him because nobody else would have anything to do with us. I told him, I can't come to work today.
When did you?
That morning, that night before, Mr. Damer, they had a little grocery store, and one of his
What did you
aunts,
do?
Aunt Rainey, slept in the store. And he had sent 2 boxes of groceries by his sister, Mrs. Beard, and Mrs. Beard's daughter, Lorna. She was about 12 years old at the time. So this was before midnight, so that would have been the 9th of January. He knew I was having a hard time. And I had gone to the Catholic Church and asked for some food, and they had refused food. There was something not right at that time at that Catholic church. And the next morning, about 5:30, I said, I got to call Mr. Damer and thank him for this food before I get started on my day. Because some days I walk from the river here. And I had an 8 o'clock class and had 3 babies to try to get some peanut butter and jelly on some sandwiches and leave at a cousin's house on the corner. And then Timothy went on to school at Eton. And they firebombed his house that night. And he was a Forest General. Now, I had asked some physicians since then why they didn't put him on a respirator, and they said they only had 2 and they were in use. I don't know if that's the truth or not. But I was halfway between here and the hospital, and walking on the surface road, someone stopped and said, "If you're going down to the hospital to see Mr. Damer, he's dead." He died. That family is very special. They are one of many special families all over this country, really. And if we don't stop and change the language from black and white, this whole world is just going to implode. We have to stop. We have to recognize each other as humans, all of us. What's going on now in the Middle East, I would say, you two better go get some DNA done because you're probably cousins. And it's all over money. I spent 26 years in the military. And until I got back to Mississippi, I knew my career was up at lieutenant colonel when I got back to Mississippi because of the person who was in charge. You run into these people everywhere. They're not just in Mississippi. I wouldn't go anyplace else to live. Would you live someplace else now?
I choose to stay here.
I choose Mississippi.
I love it.
I got called a nigger by a Cuban in Miami. And I had never been, I'm sitting on my front porch and this big wheel truck comes around. They're flying a Cuban flag and called me a nigger in Spanish. I said, I'm moving back to the United States. And we moved back to Hattiesburg in 88. I choose to live here. I choose to get along with people. I choose to love people. Those are my choices.
I also accept differences. I like different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all can get along. If I respect your culture and you respect mine, then you wouldn't have these labels. You know, that you can learn from a lot of cultures because people think that I'm Spanish, you know, and I told my granddaughter, who is half Spanish, she wants to teach me Spanish so I know what they're talking about. So anyway, at first I was kind of offended until my son told me they're going to speak their language.
Yes.
They're not doing that to offend you. But you need to learn their language, but they understand me. They'll try, you know. And one thing about their culture that I really like, I like to cook and I like food. When I go to visit my son, they turn their kitchen over to me. She'll come in, my daughter-in-law, and wash dishes and assist me, but she wants the American cooking. So I like the Spanish food. So all the different cultures, I think we can accept each other and learn from each other. But if I respect you as a person, then I'm going to give you that love that comes from above. I'm going to treat you right. I'm not going to do those things. That fear that's in people, it's going to take a long time to come out. Because I don't have any problems with anyone, but a lot of people do. A lot of people feel that there's a difference, that one race is better than the other one. And there's no such thing. People are people. And when they love their culture and they just want to retain their culture. But if we respect it, like I said, I learned, I don't know what I would do without the black culture. Because they really accepted me.
I respect people's different cultures, but I think if you make a choice to come to America, you should at least respect my flag, number one, and that's the American flag. If you want to be an American, I don't care what you do at home. I think that's the culture you're talking about.
I'm talking about the culture,
in the
different
kitchen,
cultures.
the different foods.
The different cultures in America.
But I don't believe a Muslim man has a right to cut his daughter's throat because she's kissed the boy and not married. And there are a lot of those cases in court here in America because they want to maintain the way their culture they've been in all their life. But this is America. You made a
That's
choice to
illegal
come
here.
here. Yeah, it's illegal. Well, it's more than illegal. It's just not right. And I think if you want to live in a place where you do those things, of course it's in Leviticus, but I think they ought to rip out the first 5 books, Torah, and burn it. That's what I think. But I love people. I don't care what your religion.
I'm doing better about that because I'm trying to understand other religions and their practices and see how that relate to me, because it's amazing when I can talk to them. I'm a Christian. I don't have any problem with that. If you're a Muslim and you're not the one that's believing in
The
violence,
Shia or the
yeah, you're right.
Sunni.
I'm with you, but I'm learning. So my mind is so broad now. I'm learning to get along with them, just like I will not offend my little Muslim cousin because I want to put up a wreath because they don't believe in Christian. They're Christian beliefs in Christ, but I just wanted him to help me with my Christian decoration. So what I told him and his wife, I said, now what y'all need to do now, that has nothing to do with you. I'm disabled. I want to put that wreath up there. I said, so what you need to do, you're not engaged in my practice. I'm just asking you to put the wreath up there. So I got the over with. Same thing. And I said, well, what's wrong with that, Sandra? Could you help me look up there on a shelf and just get those little ornaments down for Christmas?
Help you out with that.
Yeah. So she said, you're just as right as you can be. That has nothing to do with me. I'm just doing you a favor. But I mean, it's understanding and communicating. Now, he wants me to know how they're just so concerned about pork, the Muslims. Now, when the Lord died for our sins, there are no unclean food. So if I believe in that, and I can show you where it's biblical, I said, you have to accept my beliefs. Because I'm going to eat a little pork every now and then. It might not be good for me, but I'm going to do
There's
it.
nothing wrong with it if it's fresh.
That's right. And if it's lean.
And there was a reason all of that was written. You have to take the context.
I did.
But they just living in the 1 through 5 century.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you remember any of the SNCC people that were coming through?
Oh, yes.
Like Giad and
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Hollis and Curtis and
We know all of them.
yeah.
We
Giad.
meet every spring.
Let me tell you about that Giad.
Lawrence.
Yeah. I was the supplier. They came by my house, and they didn't have no money. They didn't have things that necessary for personal things. Make sure they had deodorant and stuff. So they came by one day, and I was so pregnant. I was about 8 months. I couldn't drive my little Volkswagen. So Giad was saying, you know, Miss Smith, that little Volkswagen is sitting there. I could really use that. I said, well, are you 21? I said, now Doug is not 21.
Yeah,
so
Doug was
I
a
don't
teenager.
even know you. I said, but anyway, I'm going to trust you. So I let them have my little Volkswagen. They took to New Orleans and burned up the motor.
Run it out of oil.
So yeah, it did.
Yeah.
So the SNCC bought me another motor. So I said, when y'all get through tearing it up, I'm going to buy me another car because I'm not going to be able to drive the little stick shift.
Now, we worked very well here together
We
in
did.
Hattiesburg.
Everybody did.
SNCC, CORE. I remember Farmer came here
He
once
did.
out of Brooklyn. SNCC, CORE, SCLC,
Right.
Student Nonviolent.
Right.
That was King.
Right. Julian Bond. What is that?
And we married and became
One.
COFO and worked together.
we had to unify because we were all doing the same thing.
And
Yeah.
no point in being different. We needed to know where each other was.
That's right.
We needed to know
Jointly work together.
when the spirit, our defense men, needed to know where they needed to be.
Who were some of the people that you worked most closely with in that context?
All of them.
Oh gosh, they were here.
And
I think
in
I
our homes and
love.
stuff, because
Yeah,
you didn't
they,
have integration. Like when somebody came through, they were hungry. You had to go in there and cook for them.
and there was no, they couldn't go into any place. They couldn't go to
Restaurant.
hotels. They couldn't go to restaurants.
You had to house them.
Yeah, you had to. I think Johnny May Walker,
Mm-hmm.
Pete Seeger slept on her floor.
Sure did.
John O'Neill, Southern Theater. He did Pearly Victorious over at Zion,
My Zion.
Mount Zion.
Mhm.
And when I went to New York and brought my children to New York, we went to Broadway to see Pearly. They called it Pearly on Broadway. I bought the long playing album. We played it until it was grooves. Because it made us feel at home.
Yeah.
Because when they were just little, John O'Neill, I call him the rooster. Moving on up,
Yeah.
what was his name? Oh, God. Melba Moore, Cleavon Little, John O'Neill, the one that had the show on TV that it was Maud kicked off from it. In the Heat of the Night, Sheriff Carol O'Connor. But the guy,
Was he in the Heat of the Night?
not Carol. Well,
Sidney?
there were the movie stars. They usually never got past Jackson or the big
they
city.
came here.
Yeah, but yeah, they would come here. But the Pearly Victorious that they did, Meathead. He called his son-in-law Meathead.
Sanford? Oh no, All in the Family.
No, All in the Family called his son-in-law Meathead.
Yeah.
But the Jeffersons that lived in the Jeffersons, what was the guy that played Mr. Jefferson?
Hensley?
Yeah, he did.
Something like
Something Hensley?
Mhm.
Sherman?
Sherman Hensley.
That's right.
He was one of those players
He was part of the Free Southern Theater?
and did Pearly Victorious right here in Hattiesburg.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like Dick Gregory.
Oh, yes, Dick Gregory
I'll forget
would come.
Yeah.
I'll never forget hearing Peter, Paul, and Mary sing in 1963.
At the March on Washington?
Yes.
Yeah.
That they did not come here, but Aaron Henry used to recite many of their songs.
Yeah.
How many miles? How many miles must the man walk down? How many white doves? How many white doves?
Yeah.
Oh, he would recite it.
Dr. Henry was a very religious man.
Henry, before Charles Evers and Medgar. I'm trying to think. No, Roy used to come. He
Roy
was
Wilkins.
national. Roy Wilkins
He's
was
been in my
national.
home. He did Higginbotham. Did
Judge
Gregory, it's
Higginbotham,
all-
yes. Judge Higginbotham was our guest speaker at the Forest Hotel. That was the first time we had ever gone to the Forest
That's
Hotel.
right.
My mother worked as a chambermaid at Forest Hotel before we left when I was just a wee baby.
I remember that well.
Mhm.
It's just so many barriers that we've broken down. I'm just so glad that God put me here during this period where I could be a part of change.
And yet we've remained the same.
Right.
With our schools are segregated. When I did not think, I really felt that if we sent our children to school, that they would teach them the same. But they don't. They still don't. There could be 20 students. If half of them are one thing and the other half the other, some are going to get it because it's done in a way that they understand it. The others are not going to get it. And that's because of those different cultures. You have to be cultural when you're teaching. And you have to do it in 3 different ways for people to remember. I think we have we have 2 whites in our band at Hattiesburg High. 2. That's pitiful. One of those goes to the same church I do. They, before I even joined the church, we had a luncheon and they were discussing moving west. And I listened because I really didn't know anything about anybody there. I didn't know who was rich, who wasn't rich, I knew the doctors because I worked at the hospital. And I told them they were going to build a separate building out west for their children. And I said, now I hear all these stories. Your grandmother was Methodist of the South. It wasn't United, it was a Methodist Church of the South. Your grandmothers got married here. Your mothers got married here. Your babies were baptized. You were baptized here. I said, now, if you build a building out there for your children, and they're going to have their youth church and all of that out there, they're not going to feel the same about this building. So if you plan to move, you might as well build a church out there and go on and be honest. And they decided to stay. And I've been there almost 20 years, 18 years or more, 20. And the same, it's some people left, but we're right back. Churches aren't as segregated. We have some people of color. And the one thing about culture that I don't like that we do, churches do, we have one church where the Baptists meet during the day and the Chinese meet at night. How about everybody come at the same time so the Chinese can learn English faster? You can learn some Chinese, maybe, and you're American. I don't believe in the separateness. When the Spanish came, mostly Mexicans after Katrina, and Red Cross was giving away money, they showed up like white on rice, and there would be 8 or 9 sleeping on the floor without a sheet in order to be in place to get money from Red Cross. It made me go to work for Red Cross, and I worked for Red Cross and long enough to get some retirement out of it. But I just don't believe in separateness. If I'm in your home, I'm going to eat what you cook. And I expect you to do the same in my home. Now, if it's something you really don't like, or you're allergic, or you just can't stand it, I can't eat bloody octopus. I can't get it past my nose. I can't eat horse meat sushi. That horse smell, I can smell that horse. I can't eat it. But I can eat all the other sushi. And when I'm in Japan or Germany, I try to speak what little language I can. But love, as Jeanette says, love takes all of those differences away. And some things have happened to me that is, some people might say is supernatural, and I don't even know how it happened. But I was in Bolivia one year, and the preacher was preaching in he was praying in Aymara, and we were all a group, and we were holding hands, and we all understood what he was saying. And after he finished the prayer, and we all said amen, we looked at each other, and I said to my husband, "Did you understand what he said?" He said, "Yeah, did you understand it?" And we started asking, and we all understood what he was saying, and he was speaking in Ayamara. So love, if we loved each other, we don't love each other. Even our creed says race. So if you say race to me, that means you believe in different races. So how can Mexican be a race? How, it's they speak Spanish.
It's a culture.
That's a culture. That's a cultural thing. So you isolate it and you learn the dialect of Spanish, and then when the Spanish came over, just like when people from Africa were brought over here as and enslaved. We were never slaves. I like that. I like that concept. We were never slaves. We were enslaved.
Yeah.
You know, for me to accept myself and move on when I know exactly who I am and what I am. When I got to that point in my life,
Your statement wrong.
I became a changed person. And I accept all the differences, and I try to understand them.
They open their mouth.
But I know that
Them you mean whites?
I love the
Or
police.
do you mean
Is all you
anybody.
Okay.
I'm talking about anybody.
Okay.
Because I'm really not hung up on
I'm not hung up on black and white.
on
No.
white or black. I'll say white people, but I'm not really saying it in a derogatory term.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really don't have any problems loving anyone.
Yeah.
And I've always been that way.
I have, more questions, but I think this is actually a really good moment to stop.
Okay.
This video raises questions, and I need for you to be extremely honest in the comments when answering them. And just so you know, I have 3 questions. Number 1, what do you think life would be like if black people got the 40 acres and a mule each? Number 2, when did you learn about the existence of the NAACP? And number 3, what did you learn about this video? Now, please be honest in the comments when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.